Welcome to today's Awesome Marriage Podcast. I'm so excited today to welcome back a good friend, Debra Fileta. She has been on the podcast more than anybody. That's because she's great and she has great stuff to say. And it's just so great to welcome you back and to get to spend some time with you again. I love everything you're doing, and it's just an honor to have you today. Thanks for being a part.
Well, thank you, Dr. Kim. I didn't realize I was one of your most frequent guests. That means a lot.
You are. Yeah. It's been great. It's been great. Every podcast that we have done has done so well because people respect you. They respect what you do, and you say it so well.
Well, thank you. No pressure today.
No, but... now then, now that I've kind of set you totally up. So we recently did a series on one-sided marriage. I'd like your perspective as a counselor on how someone growing healthier personally can also help their marriage to grow healthier also.
Oh man, that right there is the theme of my heart. Healthy people make healthy relationships. And, I think last time I was on here, we were talking about a book I wrote called Are You Really Okay? And,
yes.
What it really comes down to is our relational health changes as our personal health changes. And as healthy as we are standing alone, that's going to overflow into our relationships. And so there's value in taking the time to assess how healthy we are standing alone. And that's why I wrote that book, Are You Really Okay? To kind of help us get a game plan for our emotional health, our spiritual health, our mental health, our physical health, understanding how healthy we actually are. I think, Dr. Kim, sometimes we assume because we're Christians, we're going to be healthy. Yeah. Or because we're Christians, we're going to be good at relationships. It's just going to happen naturally. And we don't realize until problems start coming up that this isn't just a natural progression. It's something we've got to work really hard and really intentionally. And I think sometimes when a problem comes up, it'll come up in our marriage first. Yes. That's kind of where the friction happens. We're rubbing up against each other day in, day out. And that's a lot of times where problems are exposed. That doesn't always mean a marriage problem is a marriage problem, right? Sometimes absolutely. A marriage problem is a reflection of a personal problem, an individual problem, two individual problems, your problem and my problem. And when I start working on my own stuff, my own junk, my own baggage, it starts to overflow into the health of my relationship. So I love that you did an entire series on that. That makes my heart very happy.
It was really fun to do, and people have really received it well because I think it's just something we don't talk about a whole lot. Yeah. And the book that you mentioned is such a good book, and it was I loved it, and I think it's helped a lot of people also.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it.
For sure. Yeah, you said that about if we're Christian, we thought our marriage would be okay. I can remember before Nancy and I got married, thinking we're going to be so good because we're both Christians.
Yeah.
And then like 3 months in and we were throwing things at each other. It was like, what is wrong here?
It's so fascinating. I think everybody gets to that point. Maybe not. I'm not saying everybody throws things at each other.
No, we really didn't, but we were probably close.
Yeah, because all of that stuff gets magnified in the pressure cooker, in the magnifying glass of marriage. What's already there becomes even more bold and noticeable and real. That little bit of selfishness gets magnified. And now we're facing it and we've got to deal with it. And exactly what you said, it just kind of starts coming to the surface.
Yeah, absolutely. So you shared a great quote. The best relationships are created out of our overflow, not our emptiness. Let's talk about that and unpack that a little bit because I love that.
Yeah. I think sometimes, especially before marriage and especially in Christian contexts, we have this false belief that marriage is going to fill us. Marriage is going to complete us. Marriage is going to help us fulfill our calling, whatever it is. I think, especially in Christian culture, we do have a tendency to put marriage on a pedestal. Mm-hmm. We kind of assume that is like the end of the journey for us as believers. We get married and we kind of start our life and our ministry and whatever God has for us. But the problem with that mentality is we put too much on marriage. We expect too much of marriage, and marriage can't fill us up. Marriage can't complete us. The times that I have struggled the most in my relationship with my husband is when I have put more expectations on him than he is capable of filling. Mm. And to require him to fill me up is giving him and giving my marriage too much power. Marriage doesn't have that kind of power. Only Jesus does. And so I think coming into the context of marriage, realizing that I have to be a full and complete person standing alone. And when I can function out of that completeness, that is what a healthy marriage is made of. I like to think of it as 2 cups. Instead of being a half full cup, combining with another half full cup and thinking that we're full, what we really need to be is a full cup standing alone. When you take 2 full cups and you pour them together, you get the overflow. And that to me is a picture of a healthy relationship.
Oh, that's so good. And I think for some reason, and I think it's a lot of where we are in our culture now, we have such a tendency to point at the other person instead of pointing at ourselves. And I think a lot of people get stuck in that. And or they say, I've heard this, he wouldn't do that, or she wouldn't do that, or if they would change, then I would change. And so I think we have that mindset in our culture that somebody else got to do it first, and then we'll do it. And it doesn't work that way.
Yeah. And not only that, Dr. Kim, sometimes our spouses trigger us. And what I mean by trigger us is they'll do something or say something that hits deeply. It hits a soft spot. I call it an emotional sore spot. Something about that interaction and exchange really hurt me. And so my automatic assumption is to assume that it was my spouse's fault. They did something wrong. They need to change in order for this scenario to be over with. Now, I'm not saying that's not true, but I'm saying we have a role too. When I get triggered, when something upsets me and I find that I have this big, large emotional response, that's a sign of a trigger, a sore spot. And that sore spot likely existed before your spouse. Maybe it's a wound, an insecurity, a fear of abandonment, fear of betrayal, fear of not really being wanted or loved, an insecurity. And they rubbed up against it. And now I'm feeling hurt. But if we trace some of those sore spots to our past, we realize that our spouse is triggering sore spots that may have already existed before them. They're just exposing them. They're bringing them to the surface. So yes, part of the resolution is for them to take ownership of how they hurt us. But part of the resolution is for me to realize I've got a trigger. That means there's a sore spot that needs to receive more healing. A trigger is a sign of something that needs to receive more healing in my life. So how can I do that work? How can I do that personal work to get healing from that area so that it's no longer a trigger?
Yeah. And I think because somebody I know is listening to this today and they're thinking, that's me. All right. It is that. And so I think going to a Christian counselor to kind of figure out where the roots of that are would be, how do you feel about that? To really see where that is, because it is easy just to blame your spouse. But I agree, from being a counselor for as long as I have, those wounds can go way back, and we don't really put them together sometimes.
We sometimes don't. You're right. I think sometimes it takes work to identify some of those sore spots and where they're coming from. I will tell you this, if you find yourself in the same cycle of conflict, the same cycle, we all have different arguments, but the average couple tends to cycle through the same type of argument over and over again. It's kind of like a pattern that they have. Maybe she feels like he's not giving her enough, and he feels like she's asking too much of him. Like, I don't have what you need. I can't do it. I'm doing the best I can. And so his sore spot could be feeling like he's not good enough for her. And maybe that sore spot stems from his childhood. Her sore spot could be feeling like she's not really wanted in the marriage. And maybe that stems from a childhood wound from her own experience. And so all that to say, wounds run deep. And I think working with a professional counselor, working with a Christian counselor, can be so helpful in helping us get to the root of some of those individual issues that are overflowing into our marriage.
And I think for people to realize, I don't know anybody that hadn't brought some baggage into marriage.
For real.
And I
We've
think
all got it.
yeah, and the longer we go as single, I think we just accumulate a little more baggage along the way. I mean, Nancy and I had baggage at 20 years old. If we hadn't got married for another 10 years, no telling what kind of baggage we would have had at that time, because you're interacting with people, you're having good probably if you're just marrying later on, most relationships haven't been great because you didn't marry those people.
Yeah.
And so you carry this stuff, and then all of a sudden you get into a marriage and you think this is the one, which they will be, but it's not perfect.
Absolutely. And then we have the baggage we're bringing in, plus the baggage we're accumulating from life. I mean, you could have struggles at work. You could have failures in your career. You could have illness happen with your children or with your own personal health. And all of this stuff is creating more baggage and potential triggers. And so, yes, we've got to stay on top of it and realize that the majority of the work happens when we look into our own life, our own situation, our own growth and healing and maturity.
Why don't we do that? Why is it so hard for us to get to that point, do you think? Are we afraid?
I think
see different things?
I think scripture makes it clear that it's much easier to take the splinter out of your brother's eye than it is to take the plank out of your own. I think we're wired to look out rather than look in. It's easier to blame and to just take the responsibility off our shoulders than it is to just sit with our own stuff. And a funny thing is, it's more empowering to look in because we can't change anybody else. I mean, I can tell you to take that splinter out of your own eye, but that doesn't mean you're going to do it.
Exactly.
But I have the power to turn and shift my perspective and look at my own stuff, because that's where I have control. I can actually change me. I can change my responses. I can change my boundaries. I can change my interactions. I can change what I say yes to, what I say no to. I can express my needs. I have so much control and power in changing me and the way I do life. And what's interesting is you can't change your spouse, but you can change yourself, which can influence your spouse, right? You can begin to influence the situation just by looking in. So I think it's easier, though, to try to kind of point out what everybody else needs to do. It's not productive, but it's easier.
Yeah, and I think some of it, I'm just thinking of a couple of people and myself too, I think comes a point of just really trusting God with it and saying, God, I don't even want to do this, but I know that's what I need to do. It's not doing me any good to point the finger at my spouse all the time. And I think just trusting God to work in us, and I think he does. I mean, I think we'll invite him in, he shows up. If we're willing to do the work, he's going to be there to guide us through. And I think there's a comfort and there's a joy of victory that comes with that.
It's so true. I will tell you this, when I'm working with a couple, I can almost tell you with certainty how well they're going to do in counseling based on how much responsibility they're each willing to take for their personal problems. One couple I worked with spent session after session after session just blaming the other person, just literally hours and hours of the blame game. They wouldn't respond to me when I was trying to get them to look inward and take responsibility for their own stuff. It was just, no, it's her fault. No, it's his fault. No, if he wouldn't do this, to be honest, Dr. Kim, after a few sessions of this blame game, I said to them, I'm not willing to continue working with you because you're not willing to take ownership of your own stuff. And we cannot begin to heal until that happens.
Absolutely.
And so you can kind of tell how good a couple's going to do in marriage counseling based on their willingness to take responsibility for their own work, their own problems, Absolutely. The things they bring to the table.
And you're right. Sometimes people never seem to get there. They're just too busy pointing the finger somewhere else.
Yeah, they're stuck. They're stuck looking at what everybody else needs to do. And man, talk about the best way for Satan to get us stuck, huh? To just keep us looking out and never looking in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I like what you said about when one of us changes, it does affect our spouse, because I think if in Nancy and I, if I look in and I think God wants me to change something and I do that, and we've been this, it helps break the cycle, because if I change, she may not, but she's got to respond different to that. If we quit this pattern of you do this, I do this, and then we're fighting, and I get healthy in that area, it's going to affect her. And hopefully we're able to begin to heal that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's good. So we kind of talked a little bit about the relationships can't complete us. You tell a story about speaking at a Christian college, and this woman who told you she was confused when you said the relationship couldn't complete you, because she'd really been raised to believe that getting married is the only way to fulfill her God-given purpose. What did you say to her, and is that common?
I think it is common. Like I said earlier, I think especially in Christian culture, sometimes we put marriage on a pedestal. Marriage is a gift that God has given us, but it is not the end all be all. In fact, it's only the beginning of a healing journey. I mean, like we just talked about, you get married and you realize, wait a second, this is the beginning of a journey of looking in and healing and growing and being sanctified. Like I am just starting on the starting line of the process of sanctification, because iron sharpens iron. And now I'm in this relationship where I'm going to be perpetually getting sharpened. And so I don't think we see it that way when we're entering marriage. I think sometimes we give marriage too much power, and we give marriage this expectation of what it can do for us, rather than what God wants to do through us in the context of marriage. And so I think it starts with conversations like this, is helping us get our expectations in a healthy place so that we can have realistic and healthy expectations of what marriage is really all about.
Yeah, I tell couples, when I used to teach a live class, Prep for Marriage, one of the clips I used was the one from the movie where it says, "You complete me," and everybody's going ooh and ah, and then I get on, I just rip it apart in the class. But I mean, because you can't complete, only God's the one that can do that. But I tell couples too, I said, when you marry, you're starting a new book. You're not putting a new chapter, I don't think, in your book of life. You're starting a new book. And you said it well, when, those things that's iron sharpens iron, and it becomes differently when you're in a marriage relationship.
Yeah. And that's why it's also so important who you choose to marry. If it isn't just about finding this mystical, magical person, the one that God has for me that's going to complete me, then what is it about? It's about finding iron sharpens iron. It's about finding that person who is going to make me better, and I'm going to make them better. It's about finding a partner who is growing and healing and changing. And I see evidence that they are willing to take responsibility, that they are doing the work in their own life, that they are getting healthy standing alone. Because when you see these things in dating, you're going to see them magnified in marriage. You see the bad stuff magnified, but you also see the good stuff magnified. And so this is why it's important for us to help singles realize that making a wise choice in marriage is something that they have got to invest time and energy in doing. It's not just about feelings and chemistry and romance and attraction. It's about finding somebody who's going to take this journey of life with me, this process of sanctification, and we're both going to journey well.
Yeah, that's so good. I wish I could remember when Nancy and I finally got it, that our lives were going to be better because we were married to each other. And instead of trying to change each other and put each other in the mold that we thought they should be. I mean, she really should have been more like my mom, and so I'm trying to make her like my mom, because my mom was a great mother and wife, and so that was the model. And there's thank goodness I married a very strong woman, because she wasn't going in that mold at all. But I think when we came to the realization, though, that we're different for a reason, and with God's help, we're going to be so much better together than we would be apart, because we grow together, and iron sharpens iron. And over the years of our marriage, I mean, oh my gosh, I would not be anywhere who I am today without her in my life. Absolutely. How God has used her.
Yeah, I believe that. And,
Yeah.
let me add a caveat here. I'm not saying that you don't ever address or confront issues in your relationship. There's going to be times when you do
Right.
need to confront things and address things that are harmful or patterns that are
Sure.
unhealthy. But the key is presenting them in a healthy way out of the overflow of you as a healthy individual. There's a difference between pointing the finger and saying, you don't meet my needs and you don't do this and you don't do that, versus saying, I've recognized that I have a deep need for affection. And it would mean a lot to me if you could show me a little bit more affection in our day-to-day life, like maybe grab my hand or put your arm around me. It would make me feel really special. That is communicating out of your health rather than communicating out of your unhealth. And so when you begin to change, the marriage begins to change. So again, that doesn't mean we don't communicate what we need or we don't call out things that are unhealthy or harmful. We don't set boundaries in our marriage. But when we do it out of a place of health, it begins to influence the dynamic of our relationship.
Well, and I love the way you said it, because you weren't saying to a spouse, you never make me feel appreciated. You never, all these accusations. You can say it in a way of what you need from your heart. And I think most spouses are going to respond to that. I mean, certainly I would want to know that. But if you just get angry about it, you probably don't get anywhere.
Right, exactly. And so it's a big part of how you present it and how you speak. Communication skills, emotional management, expressing your needs, all of that stuff is part of the process of becoming a healthy person. Of assessing, am I really okay? Am I healthy in these areas? And my emotional expression and how I handle my emotions, how I handle conflict, the trauma from my past. It's a package. It's a package deal. And the healthier we get, the healthier the things that will overflow into our marriage.
I know you've experienced it too, but when you have a couple that comes in and kind of in the tough places we're talking about, and with counseling and certainly God's guidance and help, when they finally get there, it is such a joy to see them. I've told couples before, you don't even look like the same couple that came in here day one. Your countenance has changed. You're sitting close to each other. Before, you were hugging each end of the couch like you want it to be longer, and you just see what God can do when we really listen to him and his plan and let a counselor guide you into some really healthy behaviors. It really makes your marriage different.
It's so true. When God begins to heal us as individuals, it begins to heal our marriage.
Absolutely.
And our connection and our relationship. And I agree with you. It's one of the most beautiful things to watch people take hold of that and begin to do that work from the inside out.
Let's talk a minute about codependency, because I think sometimes people mistake that for oneness in marriage. So what's the difference between being in a codependent marriage relationship and one where, as the Bible talks about, the two become one?
Yeah. I would say this: codependence is based on what we need in a marriage. I need you to fulfill these things for me. I need you to feel secure. I need you to feel valued. I need you to feel needed and affirmed and loved. And when we function out of a place of need, we realize that it's a bottomless pit.
Yes.
Your spouse can't give you enough to fill that need. But I think a healthy marriage isn't based on my desperate need. It's based out of the fact that I am giving just as much as I'm receiving. This is not just about what I need, but what I have to offer. It's a give and take relationship. And sometimes I talk about codependency kind of like a plant. I don't know if I've mentioned this to you before, Dr. Kim, but I'm really terrible with plants, and I can't keep them alive for the life of me. I mean, you call me a black thumb, call me whatever you want, but I just can't do it. At least I pride myself in keeping my 4 kids alive.
That's a little more important. So yeah.
And so my husband bought me these succulents because I always forget to water my plants and they die. But succulents, you don't need to give them that much water.
Yeah.
And so what ended up happening is, once a week, you're supposed to give succulents just a little bit of water to keep them alive. They don't need much. But I would forget, did I give them a little bit of water or was that last week? And so what I ended up doing was overwatering the succulents and they died. So, but here's what I learned from the story about the succulents. I learned that you can kill a plant by not giving it enough water, but you can also kill a plant by giving it too much water. And relationships are very similar. I think a lot of times we think about relationships of not giving enough, but sometimes in relationships we can give too much and kill the relationship because I'm giving out of a need to feel valued, out of a need to feel loved, desired, wanted, out of a fear because I don't want to be abandoned or rejected. So I'm just giving and giving and giving and giving with no expectation of receiving. That's not healthy in a relationship. And so the opposite of a codependent relationship is a relationship in which I'm giving and receiving. Yes. Like we started this conversation. It's a two-sided relationship, not a one-sided relationship that's filling some unhealthy cycle. But we both give and we both receive. We're both watering and nurturing and tending to the life and the health of our marriage.
Yeah, that's so nice. I love the plant analogy. That's so good. So aside, I guess he hadn't bought you any more plants.
Yeah, no, now we've got fake plastic succulents.
I love it.
Sitting on our kitchen table as we speak.
And they don't die.
They don't die. They've been alive for a while. We don't even have to do anything.
They will be there forever. So we kind of talked about things that are harmful to Christian marriages. Any other false beliefs that you see that would fall into those categories?
Oh man, false beliefs. There's so many different false beliefs, I think, that we can bring into marriage. One is what we talked about, our expectations of marriage, what it can do for us. It's funny. Another false belief, I think, is that we shouldn't have problems because we're Christians. Like, I think sometimes Christians get surprised by the fact that there's marriage problems and they think this must be horrible. I must have married the wrong person.
Right.
Without realizing that we change over time and we grow over time. And like we said earlier, this is a process of sanctification. This is a journey that both of us are on to get better with each step. So getting our expectations right. Another thing, we won't dive too deep into this subject, but I recently wrote a book about sex. And we have so many false expectations about what sex is meant for, what it's supposed to do or not do, who is it for, what's its role. And when we come to marriage with all of these false expectations, even about intimacy, about communication, about whatever it is, we end up trying to live up to these false expectations instead of basing our actions and decisions on God's truth.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, I guess it's because we let the world define so many things for us. So we look at movies, and I was just thinking, where we get some of those things. I think it's probably different now because kids grow up with so many different things that they watch and stuff. But when I grew up, Cinderella was a big movie, and the last deal is they lived happily ever after. And I think girls probably more than guys, because I don't know, guys usually watch Cinderella once and they're off to, okay, I want Lion King or something else. But, but I think that fact is that kind of gets in somebody's mind, and then we're supposed to live happily ever after.
Yeah. Even Lion King has subliminal love story messages in there, right?
So, and then of course we look at some Hollywood marriages and stuff. And I did a blog on this a couple of years ago, and I didn't write everything I found because it was hard to find a marriage that had any substance to it at all. There are few. But I think but then we put a lot of, stock in what we see and what we hear. And
add to that the social media culture. I mean, how many of us are posting our real life stories on social media? We're posting the highlights. We're posting the glamorous tributes to our spouse on our anniversary. We're not talking you through the work it took to deal with that conflict the night before. You know, so you see this picture of everybody's got this amazing relationship and I'm the only one. Something must be wrong with us. Something must be wrong with my spouse. Something must be wrong with me. You feel isolated, you feel alone. And I think it makes the pit even harder to climb out of when you feel like you're the only one who is struggling in marriage. But when you pull back the veil, you realize that we're all on this journey. One of my favorite things that I've recently done, Dr. Kim, is a couples therapy podcast series. You'll find this interesting. I basically invited couples on the podcast to do live on-air therapy sessions. And the Christian couples that from the outside in, you would think, looking at Instagram, they had their life together. Everything was perfect. They were in love. And then here we are in a live on-air counseling session. We hit the record button and we start processing through some of the things. And you realize that even these couples that look so wonderful and perfect, and they're great people who love the Lord, but even them, they have struggles, daily struggles, significant struggles in their marriage. And they need to do the work in order to get out the other side. And so you realize that we're all on this journey. And for us to be able to acknowledge that this is hard, we're all on this journey together. We've got to do the work in order to get to a healthy place. But when we do the work, it's so worth it. It is so worth the intimacy and the authenticity and the vulnerability of being in a marriage where you are truly known and truly seen and truly loved. And you've got this partner to walk beside you on the journey of life. I think the work is worth it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I always thought, and I guess it probably wouldn't work to have a real life Facebook page where everybody just put the stuff that they don't put, here's a video of us fighting last night.
That should be your next Instagram account. Yeah, I would follow that for sure.
I think it is, but I think what it is, people buy into that and they think there's something really wrong with me because we're not like that. And we all have problems. That's why if sometimes I'll tell a couple, if they're in a church where the pastor is not transparent and he's pretty much put himself on a pedestal, sometimes I've told them, I think you ought to try somewhere else because you need to know that person is a sinner just like the rest of us. And he struggles just like the rest of us, or she struggles. And that's part of our journey. And I think when you have other people that are willing to pour their heart out and be vulnerable and be transparent, then I think it's healing for them. And then I think it's healing for us that hear it.
It's so true. I was so proud of these courageous couples because it takes courage to get on a podcast and say, you know what, we're going to do this for our marriage and we're going to do this for the church at large to show people that we're all on a journey. And it was so beautiful and so healing. And so many couples sought counseling because of listening to the work that other couples were doing. So if you're out there, I just want to remind you and encourage you, like, you're not alone. We are all doing the work. And it's part of what has to happen for us to become healthy individuals and for that to overflow into the health of our marriage.
So if somebody's listening and they really feel their marriage is failing to fulfill them, what would you say to them?
I'd say congratulations. You have reached the starting line of healing.
That's so good.
Because your marriage can't complete you. And once you feel that and know that to be true, that's when the real work begins of figuring out, what does it look like for me to start feeling full and complete and whole, standing alone. And when you begin that journey, I think it changes everything.
I totally agree. My book, 7 Secrets to an Awesome Marriage, and the first one is Stop the Insanity and then Start Pursuing God Together. I had so many people that said, you should put God first. And I thought, I think AA has something. You got to admit you have a problem before you invite God in. And I think what you said, getting the starting line, is really just saying, I got a problem. We have a problem. We need to do something. And then you begin to pursue God, counseling, other things that are going to help you in that. But you got to admit you have a problem or you're never going to get anywhere.
Right.
So the starting line's a good place to be. So I agree. Congratulations to that person. Very good.
On your mark, get set, go.
Yes. How do believers practically begin to find freedom from those issues, everything we've talked about today?
Yeah.
Because we talk about freedom in Christ. We talk about freedom. How do we get there?
Going back to the plant analogy, I think it's all about getting to the roots. I think sometimes we try to put a Band-Aid over things and solve them superficially. Here's a couple management skills. We can try and do this in the present. But really, if we're not getting to the root, that root source spot that we talked about earlier, the weed's going to keep coming back up again. You can't just snip off the top of the weed and hope it doesn't come back. You've got to get to the root. And if you're in a marriage where you feel like the same problems keep coming up again and again and again, there's a good chance you haven't gotten to the root. But that's also good news, because it means that there's the hope that you can get to the root and things can begin to change once and for all.
Yeah, I love you said that, because I think sometimes we expect to get through it really quickly, or we got through it and we didn't. But sometimes it is a process, isn't it? And I think God seems, in my experience, has been very patient to take us a step at a time. And because we get to a step and God's helped us, doesn't mean he's through with it yet. It may be he wants to give us some time to absorb that, work on that. And then he kind of shows us another little place there. But so I think it's, God, if he threw everything at me at once that he has taught me the last how many years, I would have probably run.
Yeah.
But he's so patient and so loving. And
it's
he did
so
it
true.
A little bit at a time, because he knew what I could take, and he knew what I needed to do to absorb what he was teaching me and how to integrate that. But for Nancy and I together to integrate that into our marriage, and it took time. But at every step made our life better and made our marriage better.
It's so true. And part of that is recognizing what is the main thing in my life right now, the main thing in my marriage right now, because you want to focus on it one thing at a time. I always say it's one layer at a time. The Lord is bringing us healing one layer at a time and revealing things that need to heal. And so for us to have even a realistic expectation about healing, let's focus on one thing at a time, one layer at a time, one root at a time, so that we're not overwhelmed, and realize that we've got a lifetime to heal.
That's right. This is kind of like boot camp before we go to heaven, we take a little bit at a time. So you mentioned earlier the book, Are You Really Okay? And I think that was the last thing we talked about when it came out. I left out challenge, encourage us to look at health in all areas of life. What are some ways you've enjoyed growing in health personally?
Yeah.
Recently?
Yeah, I love talking with you about Are You Really Okay? And I really do appreciate, I would recommend for those who are listening, if you want a practical step to start getting healthy from the inside out, start there. Start doing the work in your own life. Go through each chapter, each 5-minute checkup at the end. Start applying this stuff to you and becoming healthy. I know for me, out of the 4 sections, emotional health, spiritual health, mental health, and physical health, I kind of walk you through in the book my own journey with mental health, panic attacks, trauma, just all of that. And I feel like I really took the time to do the work there. But one thing that came up as I was writing Are You Really Okay? Was the fact that I needed to put more work into my physical health. As a therapist, I can fixate and kind of focus in on my mental and emotional health. I think I'm wired to do that. Yes. But my physical health was kind of lagging behind. And as I'm getting older, I'm realizing, what? I've got to take care of this area of my life. And so that's something that I have personally been integrating, from strength training to trying to get a certain amount of steps per day, to putting a bigger focus on my health and nutrition. I feel like the Lord has kind of helped me to spotlight that area in my life personally as an area of growth. And I talk a lot about the body-mind connection. When you begin to change in your body and your nutrition, it also begins to change your mind and your mental health and your emotional health. So it's all interrelated. And God's going to spotlight one of those areas for us that we need to kind of focus in on. And that, for me, was the area he brought to my attention during the writing of the book.
That's cool. It's interesting how probably the last thing you thought God was going to reveal to you as you wrote that book, and all of a sudden, here it is. I think people listening, and we're talking about ways to get healthy and get your marriage healthy and stuff like that. And I think Nancy and I didn't really plan it that way, but we've always worked out. It was something that was always important to us, and it came to me probably 10 years ago, and I thought, our marriage has gotten so good. We are in such a good place right now. I want to be with this woman as long as I can. And being healthy was a part of that. And I think just being conscious of that, if you're going to work for your marriage and you want to do well, you want to do everything you can to have as many years as you can with that person.
You guys are such a great example. I love watching you on Instagram. And I believe you're both in your 70s, right?
Yeah, we're both. Yes.
You don't look like it and you don't act like it. You guys have energy and pep. But what's beautiful is that you have kept yourself healthy emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and physically, so that you can continue to do the work that God has called you to do. And I always feel so inspired watching the two of you on Instagram doing your TikTok videos, and truly the energy and the work that you put into this space means a lot for us, the younger generation. And gives us a model, an inspiration of that's what I want my marriage to look like when I'm in my 70s. So I just want to thank you for that, Dr. Kim, and thank sweet. Nancy as well.
I will thank you. And Nancy, she doesn't like to be in the spotlight, but she has gotten into this, and we have a wonderful young woman that's our social media director just for Nancy and I, and Nancy loves her, and so she stepped out in areas, and she's loving doing it too. So it's something that there's not a lot of things in ministry that we do that connect on the same thing. She's got things she's interested in, I'm interested in, but this is something that's been really fun to do together.
I love it.
And we get it's funny, the comments we get. It's great. Really fun. So let's go back to your marriage. We all now know you have a wonderful husband because he bought you succulents, trying to help you keep plants alive, even though it didn't work. What are you enjoying and loving about your marriage today?
It's funny because in different seasons of marriage, you have more bandwidth and more capacity for all of the extras. And we're frankly in a season where we don't have all of the extra bandwidth, because we had a newborn baby a year ago. We've got 4 kids and we homeschool. On top of that, my husband's got his career. I've got my career. I think one of the things that I have just valued and cherished the most in our marriage is how we function as a team. We are truly a team. There's no such thing as your roles or her roles or his roles, but okay, who has strengths in this area? Who's got the skill sets? Okay, let's follow your lead in that area. Let's follow your lead in this area. We've just really functioned as 2 co-pilots flying the plane. And in this season where we don't have all the extra bandwidth, I think it has been such a joy just to realize that when you marry somebody, you're marrying a teammate, you're marrying a co-pilot, you're marrying somebody who you have to rely on in order to succeed at life. And when we both have the interest of the other person, we're a team. When you and I win, that attitude and mentality, I think, has just gone so far for us in this season where we're managing young kids and laundry and dishes and schedules and bedtime and all of that stuff. So I'm just so grateful for the fact that we're such a good team.
Because we talk about that all the time at Awesome Marriage, and that's so cool the way you described it. Because when we get there, it's amazing. It is amazing when you work together instead of working against each other.
Yeah, I agree. And maybe we don't have as much time right now for extra date nights. Maybe we don't have as much time to kind of focus on having fun or going here and there, or the chocolates and the roses. But you realize, what? That's not actually the stuff that makes marriage work.
Yeah.
So we're in that deeper season of just kind of focusing on the essentials. And I think I'm so grateful for it.
Well, and when we do that, like when Nancy and I look back, so many couples, when they get to the empty nest stage, they don't know each other. And the things that you're talking about, being a team, whether you're raising kids, whatever season God has you in, You're preparing for that time when you do have more time. I remember the first week when we realized we don't have to be home to help me with homework. We don't have to cook dinner. We didn't have a pet then. It was like, we could go to dinner on Tuesday night and not have to worry about it. Not have to get home and help with homework,
See, I can't even imagine that stage yet.
I know.
We're in the thick of it.
I loved every season. And I think Nancy would say we loved every season with our kids, every different stage. We loved doing stuff with them, watching them succeed, watching them grow, watching them, helping them through tough times. And then, there's a kind of that mixed thing when they leave of, oh, that season's over. But then there's also, wow, this new season is pretty cool that God's given us too. So they're all great.
I love that. And it is a beautiful thing to know that, each season has its own things, its own struggles, but also its own unique things to enjoy and savor. And so we don't want to miss that.
Exactly. The only one I look back and didn't, some guy told me one time, he said, I was complaining about changing diapers, dirty diapers. And he said, someday you'll look back and you'll wish you could change a dirty diaper again. I've never wished that. I never had that. I never got that.
Because if everything you need a glimpse of it, I can just ship over one of mine and just give you a.
It's it's all fun. It's all good. Thank you so much for all you do, for your books that help so many people, for who you are and what you represent. And thanks so much for spending time again with us on Lost and Married Podcast.
Thank you for having me.